and welcome. My name is Nicole Karras. I am a talent acquisition specialist for Gray Television, or a recruiter for Gray Television. Joining me is my fellow recruiter, Stephen Cruz, as well as our Vice President of Recruiting for Gray Television, Jennifer Dale. And before we get to today's conversation about news producing, let's watch a quick video.
When we say grow with Gray, we mean Gray gets you where you want to go. With more than 100 markets and top-rated stations from coast to coast, you will find the perfect fit. Cover the nation's biggest events, create award-winning content, and tell stories that matter to your community. Gray invests in investigative journalism, a culture of asking questions and finding solutions. Gray's growth-focused, customized training is designed to help you succeed and get you to the next level. Gray knows you deserve the best benefits in the business. Seriously. And bosses who understand work-life balance. So get noticed, get going, and start growing. Grow with Gray.
So Gray is a fantastic company to start your career in television broadcast. And we want to talk about one of the crucial positions in our newsrooms where we have a lot of openings right now. And as recruiters, we understand how important this role is. A day in the life of a TV news producer. So why do we want to talk about producing? Well, these positions are really in high demand. We always say as recruiters, when we visit schools, when we talk to journalists around the country, that if you want to get into news producing, if you've got that skill set, that know-how, and that drive, you can be really successful as a news producer anywhere you want to go, as we have openings in most of our markets in 113 markets across the country. We have positions in all day parts. So no one newscast is the same, even within their own stations. As a former news director, Stephen, when we're talking about different newscasts throughout the day, how do those newscasts compare to each other and what makes them different?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like the news cycle. It's always changing all day long. You start your morning, your viewers in the morning want to know what the weather forecasts are going to be, what the stories that happened overnight, that type of thing. So producers are going to be working all night long, putting together the latest information on the stories from the previous day, as well as the stories for the day ahead. Then as you get into the day, news is going to break and different things are going to happen. So those producers are going to continue to tell that story and hand it off to the next producer all day long.
What I love about having a different day part, and I've worked mornings, I've worked evenings, I've worked weekends, is that each one kind of has its own little flavor. And while it's not for everyone to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to anchor a newscast, I have the time and flexibility to add a little bit more personality. And I know that producers also love having that flexibility to add the chat, so to speak. They just have to tell the anchors to wrap it up, when we get going a little too long. But it's nice to be able to have experience in different day parts and really experience how different producing looks, depending on the time of day and really day of the week. And also, when it comes to producing, there are a ton of growth opportunities. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the skills for producing too, before we talk about the kind of the way that we structure a day as a producer. And Jennifer, as a former producer, that's how you got going in this industry. What are some of the qualities you now look for when looking for producers?
I look for a strong writer. A producer is, you have your finger in a bit of everything. So as a producer, you've got to be a strong writer, but you also have to have a vision. I always tell people that if a newscast is a wheel that is turning down, rolling down the road, the producer is holding all of the spokes together at the center. So you've got to be able to be a good writer and to have a vision of what you want the newscast to look like. But you've also got to be able to communicate with your anchors with the idea of what that would, to what they're looking for. You've got to be 2 steps ahead. I always tell people, if you love to write and you love telling people what to do, you too could become a producer.
I love that. And, crisis happens in newsrooms. You're also kind of a crisis manager because you got to keep your cool when everything else around you seems to be chaotic. The calm in the chaos is what I like to say is a strong skill for a producer. And we've got a quick video from a clip from a show called The Newsroom to kind of show what that calm in the chaos may look like.
45 back.
We gotta pull the Strauss-Kahn package.
Why?
We blew the fact check. We say the French police charged him with attempted rape. The French police are investigating him for attempted rape.
We push play in that package in 90 seconds.
Is it on camera or VO?
VO.
Show it to me. 16. Get Ryan on the phone. Use a landline. Jake, let's go.
15 seconds live.
16's up.
Play it.
Package goes in 60.
Did you know that in 91, 20 Kuwaitis died after being hit by falling bullets while
celebrating the end of the Cold War?
Didn't.
Law of averages caught up to them.
Yeah.
118 people treated at a Los Angeles
hospital for injuries sustained from random
falling
Shut up.
bullets. Copy that.
Right there.
In 3, 2.
Shannon, at this hour, do the rebels know anything about where Colonel Gaddafi might be?
That's their frustration.
Answer the phone.
He's banned.
But he's believed to still be in Tripoli.
Nobody knows for sure.
Ryan, hey, it's Jim. I'm putting you on speaker at New York Control.
Play it.
What's going on?
Where are you?
I'm in Benihana with my kids.
Get to a quiet place. Hurry.
30 seconds.
Play it for me.
But there's more trouble ahead for the French diplomat. Strauss-Kahn still faces a civil suit here in New York, and in an unrelated case, French police have charged him with the attempted rape of writer Tristan Bannon in 2003. In addition,
Ryan?
despite...
You there?
Sorry. Yeah.
Say, are investigating charges of attempted rape brought by...
Are investigating charges of attempted rape brought by...
2/10 over.
Little faster on my cue. Say it like a phrase. Stand by.
Shannon Hamid reporting live on this historic day from Tripoli. Turning now to Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Today, New York Supreme Court Judge Michael Obas dismissed all charges against the former IMF chief after the prosecution cited problems with the accuser's credibility.
Roll 60.
Ryan Franklin was
On
in the
my
courtroom
cue,
today and has this report.
A smiling and visibly relieved Dominic Strauss-Kahn walked out of the courtroom a free man today, more than 3 months after the former head of the International Monetary Fund was arrested and charged with sexual assault. But there's more trouble ahead for the French diplomat. Strauss-Kahn still faces a civil suit here in New York, and in an unrelated case, French police are investigating charges of attempted rape brought by writer Tristan Bannon in 2003. In addition, despite the Manhattan District Attorney's Office choosing not to...
Okay, so the chances that you're going to be able to do something of that level in a local newscast, probably pretty slim, but it's an example of how something chaotic happened. And the producer, Mackenzie, was really communicating with everyone involved in that newscast, from the reporter she had to call, who was at Benihana, who the person who came in to tell her about the fact check blown, to everybody in the booth. The one person she didn't display this chaos to, who never knew, was the anchor, calm as a cucumber. And she handled it really well. And I'm sure that, both of you, Stephen and Jennifer, have stories about how this has happened in your newsrooms. It's just... communication. Can you just talk about how important communication is as a producer?
You just have to. I mean, you've got to communicate with everybody.
I mean, you're what's holding everything together as a producer. If a producer loses their cool or loses track or doesn't know where to go next, then the newscast is going to fall apart. I mean, that's just, it is what it is. You can also imagine it. Apparently I'm a big fan of metaphors. Imagine it like a duck that's swimming along the water. A duck or a swan is very graceful, right? They're gliding across the top of the water, but underneath, like, the little legs are really flipping through. That's what's happening. And way to go, considering you, producer, you're the legs of the duck, making sure everything goes through so that it just looks nice and easy and smooth on top. It's a great feeling of accomplishment when you pull that off.
And you build trust within your team too, when you're able to keep that calm in the chaos. So let's take a look at kind of what a day might look like for a TV news producer. Really, it starts before your day even gets going. And this really goes for any position in a newsroom. Just be a news consumer wherever you get your news. And we, ultimately suggest that you get it from a reputable place. Social media can have tidbits here and there, and it can certainly clue you into things that are happening around you and in your community. But pay attention to what your station continues to cover in newscasts that you aren't directly a part of. Be aware of things that are happening regionally. nationally, internationally. What do your viewers want to know? And what can you tell them as part of your newscasts? Read articles, read newspapers, magazines, whatever you can get your hands on, just be a consumer. Reporters are known for having sources and for developing those sources, and that's usually where they go to pitch story ideas. But the best producers have sources as well. Newsrooms might have, and perhaps, Jennifer and Stephen, your newsrooms had this too. We had a binder, and it was just called the Beat Book. And it had a list of every county sheriff, every police department in there. And when there was a down moment, a producer might make a couple of beat calls just to say, hey, what's going on there today? Anything we should know about? And maybe, that turns out to be in your mind a waste of time in that moment. But guess what? Something will happen in that area at some point. And if you've developed that person as a source, they'll be able to respond to you a little quicker just because they've got that trust already established with you.
So was there, hey, Stephen, what's the best story you ever got off a beat call?
Let me think for a minute.
Well, I'll give you one that it was when I was interning, actually, because when I was interning, they used to make the interns make the beat calls. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Why are they making me do this? This is stupid. And, a few weeks in, like, I chat with everyone, but a few weeks in, I called this middle of nowhere police department where I called every single day and nothing ever happens. And he was like, yeah, you know what? Plane crashed. And so we were the only people who knew that this small plane had crashed in their DMA. And it was only because the intern called every day to get to see if there was anything going on. And I was talking to them and they kind of knew who I was at that point. Like, yeah, we're going to tell the nice lady about what's happening here. No one was hurt. So that was a good thing about it. But it was pretty impressive to this, 21, 22 college student to break a story.
I did make a call one time about a court case, and I called and they're like, no, that case is not going on, but this one is. And it was a better case than the first one. And so it was a murder trial that we were not expecting to actually go that week. And so
you'd be surprised what you would get from beat calls. I know a lot of people think beats and that beat call system is out of date, especially in an age of social media. It's not. There's a reason some of that stuff is good old fashioned journalism.
Mm-hmm. Especially in smaller towns that may not utilize social media the same way, a larger town would.
I tell this story a lot at different visits, but Ken Curtis is the oldest journalist in Alabama, and he works at WTVY in Dothan, Alabama. And I'm not saying this is the right first question to ask because we've all been taught to ask first name, last name, spelling on an interview. But his first question in most cases is, what's your phone number? Because he wants to get your contact information because 6 months down the road, he may think of a story and think, oh, I know so-and-so. Let me pull him up in my phone. But he has so many numbers. It's so important to keep up with people.
I thought it was a great advice. We did a session on, it was story pitches, but it kind of goes along with this. And Estelle Parsley, who's our news director in Augusta, said what she recommends her reporters do is when you're talking to someone, like, can I put my phone in your, or can I put your, could you put your phone in my note? Your number in my phone. And as she was going through and she's getting through them, not only does she put their phone and their phone number, she puts tidbits about them in there, like what comes up in a conversation. Like she used an example with me of where my daughter, like, so where do you live? How did you move here? All of those things. So later when she has a pitch, if she needs someone who like, hey, did you hear about what was happening at so-and-so school? She's like, oh, wait, Jennifer's daughter goes there. I wonder if she's heard about this, or she's got a real person for the story. And I just thought that was brilliant. I'm pretty good about taking notes, but I never associated those notes with the contact of my phone. What a wonderful way to keep track of people.
Sources are so very valuable in what we do. And especially in a day and age where there's information overload everywhere you look, having those sources is so very important no matter what your job is in a newsroom. And when it comes to email, I know we get a lot of it, and 9 out of 10 emails probably aren't going to be pertinent to you and your day. But just sit down, take 5 minutes, 10 minutes before, you start your shifts, or maybe after your shift at the end of the day, just to catch up on what's going on in the newsroom. If you had any emails come in from sources or any story ideas that came your way in your inbox, just so you're prepared for the morning meeting. So let's talk about that.
I'm sorry, when you go into your emails, sort them into different mailboxes, because if it's something for the future, you could help future you out by if let's say you get this email saying this is going to happen on November 8th or whatever, and you're like, okay, well, I don't need this now, it's October, but let me stick it in the file ahead for the day when I might need something for my newscast, for a story, for something, because do whatever you can to help future you out. And just being organized, you'd be amazed how much that will help future you.
Organizational skills, so important.
You can set up a lot of rules for certain emails to go to certain boxes and stuff like that too. That will help
that is
you
helpful.
on sorting. But let's talk about that 10th email real quick. When COVID had just started, and I was still news director in Dothan, I got a phone call, and it was a nursing home administrator, and they're like, "We've got a press release we want to send you," and I'm like, "Just send it an email." And I didn't think anything about it at the time. And about 5 minutes later, one of my reporters calls and says, "Have you looked at this email yet?" And this administrator was announcing the first COVID case in Dothan. They did not reach out to the local health officials, the local city governments. They contacted the news station. So make sure you look at those emails. It's critical.
Sometimes that's the only way you may get a piece of information is through email. So has some value. Okay, so we're now starting our day as a TV news producer. And for most news producers, again, it's depending kind of on what shift you're working, what time of day, but typically you're going to start your day with what's called a story pitch meeting. This is when, reporters come to the table with ideas, but it's not just reporters who can come to the table with story ideas. It can be anybody in the newsroom, right? We're all
journalists. Every person in a newsroom should have story ideas and story pitch. It's not just the job of reporters. The reason you do this is because you're curious. This is actually a pet peeve of mine. Don't show up in a meeting and think like, what are you going to give me today? Like, no, that's all of our job. We should all be curious. We should all be looking for that story.
Some of the best stories have come from producers.
Yeah, even managers. I made myself pitch stories every day as the news director. I made my assistant, the assignment manager. Everybody had to come in with some story ideas.
So in that process of kind of talking through the story ideas of the day, and perhaps this is the way it's structured at my former station in Cedar Rapids, is that we kind of assign the stories out once everything's been shared and there's been a moment of discussion, and then reporters leave the room, and then it's a conversation between the assignment editor, the news director, so your management in your newsroom, and then the news producers who are producing the newscasts for those pieces that we just talked about. And you really need to decide what's the big story of the day. And some days that'll be easier to identify than others. Some days there's not an obvious lead story, and you really need to talk through and brainstorm how you're going to build up the top story of the day. And that's what we like to call top story treatment. That can look a lot of different ways depending on the story, but this is where that creativity as a producer really comes into play. How are you going to present this information? Do you have something you can show live, a live picture? If your lead story happens to be about, a big fire, for example, do you have a city cam or a way of having a photographer out there live to show that impactful video, right off the top of your newscast? Do you have an interview with someone with a piece of sound that can really, grab a viewer's attention and draw them in for that top story? And then once the story is told, is there other ancillary information that you can add to the end of that? Perhaps this happened early enough in the day where you were able to find, a building inspection record, or you were able to find if a fire had happened in this part of town or in that building before. So you can see how you can take what might just seem like a 30-second story or a 30-second piece of information and really give it that top story treatment. And I'm sure you guys have experience in doing that, building up a story when you don't feel like you have a top story of the day.
Or, I mean, just think of it this way. You're even figuring out the best way to tell the story because, again, your goal is not to make a story bigger than it is, but how do you best tell the story? Because you need to make sure that the viewer understands the importance. You don't want to downplay a story, but you also don't want to oversell it. But how do you give the story the treatment it deserves? How do you make sure that a viewer is going to find it visually interesting, how they're going to find it useful to them to watch, how you're not going to waste their time? And honestly, as a producer, it's a lot of fun to use video and pictures and sound to tell the day's story and to figure out how to weave it all together into something. My goal was always to weave all of it together into something that would make someone stop and go, huh, I never thought of it that way. So think about, that. I mean, that's what a producer does, is a producer is sharing, a vision, with the viewers at home.
And how are you going to advance that story from one show to the next to the next? That's so important as well, because a lot of times we forget about that. If it's your big story of the day and you're running it at noon because it happened that morning, how are you going to make it relevant still, important still at 5, 6, 10, that type of thing?
What's next? So, you always have to ask yourself, like, what's next? What's the value? Just because something is your lead story at noon does not mean it's your lead story at 4, 5, 6, 7. We very much live in a what have you done for me lately world.
And you really have to take note of daily staffing too. I wanted to put that in there just because, especially for smaller stations, you can't just invent people or pull people in off the street to shoot video for you. You've got to be aware of what you have for staffing. If you start assigning live shots, do you have a photographer to cover that? Because a lot of stations don't allow, one-man band or MMJ live shots. So be aware of what you have for staffing. Don't stretch people so thin that you're going to create a lot of angst throughout the day, and just, be cognizant of what you're able to do with who you have in your newsroom in any given day. And then, a lot of times meteorologists will participate in the story pitch meeting too, especially if the story that day is going to be the weather. If you've got a big snowstorm coming your way, if there is a hurricane forming off the coast, the meteorologist really needs to be involved in story pitch meetings, because they're going to be able to share what the timing of the impact will be. And a lot of times in those bigger events, that can shape what the day's news coverage looks like as well.
And it doesn't matter where you live. Almost in every market I've ever worked in, weather has been the number one thing that viewers come to us for. Weather is the story of the day until it isn't. Everything else has to be more important than weather for it not to lead a newscast.
I agree.
Meteorologists love hearing that. My chief meteorologist used to say all the time, I'm more important than you. And I said, okay, I'll give you that. But
well, I mean, and it's the job of a meteorologist to make sure that that they're telling the weather story of the day and that they're bringing value with that. It's not valuable if all they're doing is telling you what the weather is like outside right now. Any of us can look out the window and tell you that. What they need to be able to do is tell us what's next. They need to be able to tell us, about all of those, the science of it. They need to be the predictions, not, I always say a good weather forecast should be, at least 2/3 forward focused.
Now we've gotten through the story pitch meeting and you're sitting down at your desk, and the first thing you're going to want to start to do is to start building your rundown. And this is essentially an outline for the newscast for the day. So if you've made an outline in class before for a project, this really just helps organize your thoughts and gets them into a space where they are movable, because what you start with as a rundown is probably not what you're going to end with as a rundown at the end of the shift before the newscast actually takes place. So the easiest thing to start with is with branded and special content. What I mean by that is, we talked about every newscast has a different flavor. Well, sometimes there are designated blocks where things typically go. There's a lot of thought on blowing up rundowns and making things different. However, when, especially in a smaller station, having this special content in a designated area can really give you a place to start building your rundown, because otherwise it's going to be an overwhelming free for all. So if you've got a block that we know this is where our health stories go, and chances are, your health stories aren't going to change from morning until when your newscast airs that evening. So starting with that news that doesn't necessarily need a lot of updates throughout the day is a good place to start. Also look at your national and international content. Keep in mind here in the US, what's happened overseas, it's the time difference. And so a lot of what's happening overnight, but again, for morning producers, it's happening for them right now. So just be mindful of what's going on around the clock nationally and internationally, and create some reminders for yourself to check in with the desk and the reporters. Some of the best producers I worked with had a little alarms that they would set on their phone to create themselves a reminder to say, this is when I need to check in on this court case because the arraignment was supposed to be today. Or, I'm supposed to be hearing from this reporter on whether or not she got a source for this story, so I know if I can put that story in my newscast. Creating those reminders is just a part of what Jennifer was talking about earlier, about being organized. You've got a lot of moving pieces going on throughout the day and a lot to keep track of. And it's exhilarating, but also don't let it be overwhelming for you. And being organized is a great way to make that happen. And then as you're building your rundowns, obviously put a placeholder in there for the top stories you would have talked about and for that reporter content. Just know that's going to be the last content to come in, and that can shift. And your reporters may come in and say, I know I was slated to talk for 1 minute and 15 seconds, but I've got 2 minutes of content. Can I do that? And you're going to have to be prepared to say yes or no to that, depending on what the content is. I see that we have some producers with feelings.
Actually, the answer to that is always, you can have as much time as it is good. However, let's talk about why you need that extra time.
The content dictates the format.
Exactly.
Right? That's what I've always been told, and why I always tried to sneak another 15 to 30 seconds in when I was trying to tell a story. So this is going to be the meat of your day, right? At the heart of producing is a really good writer, a really good storyteller, and really anything you do in a newsroom is going to require strong writing skills, but a producer especially. So to start with, the KISS method, which if you've not heard of that before, it's keep it simple, stupid, KISS. And so that's just a way of saying, you've got a finite amount of time to fill within a newscast. In a 6 o'clock newscast, it would be about a 12-minute news hole once you take out time for weather, sports, commercials.
Commercials, probably.
Yeah, you got about 12 minutes to tell the day's stories kind of in what is a 30-minute newscast. And
especially you got reporters that are taking 2 minutes at a pop.
Sometimes the content dictates the format. However, you need to keep it simple. You need to use your inverted pyramid. You need to start with the information that's most important up front. And you need to think like a viewer, right? You need to make sure you're giving the viewer the information they need to know. It might be a detail in there that you think might be important, but you really need to understand what viewers need to know, because a lot of stories are going to have to be told in 20 to 30 seconds. And you've got to figure out the best way to do that. A lot of that comes with time and practice, but keeping it simple is going to just benefit you in the long run. And as you're writing, just have in the back of your mind, what visuals do I have to go with this? It could be a fantastic story, but watching someone talking on the television is not great TV.
Boring.
It doesn't matter how great we look. People want to see graphics. They want to see perhaps an interaction with a green screen or a graph or captivating video or sound. Something other than the person talking is going to just make the story come to life. And you can get creative with this, right? As a former news anchor, I loved being moved all over the studio and interacting with some of the technology we had in our studio to better tell a story where, visuals typically aren't there. So that creativity really comes into play as you're starting to write your newscast for the day. And then just put a little notation on there. We're going to show you an ENPS rundown here in a bit, but mark stories that need updates so you can come back to those stories and just update those as you go throughout the day.
I didn't know this early on, but most of our stations use ENPS, and you can get custom things built into those rundowns. Like we put in a note section so that you could see, okay, this needs to still be fixed. This needs to be added, that
I
type of
used
thing.
to add special columns in my rundowns so I would be able to know like when I was completely done with the story, when it wasn't, when I didn't need to update it anymore. Like if it was my initials and a star by it, it meant that that was ready to go. I didn't need to read that again. If it and my day was not complete until that was how my rundown was when every story in my rundown had my initials with a star in it, then I could leave and go to the booth.
So real quick on content, unpopular opinion for some producers, but the kicker is not the most important thing you should be focusing on each day.
It's really boring.
You know,
a kicker,
Just
by the
because
way, is that little
you
feel-good
know.
moment at the end of a newscast, by the way, if you're not familiar with what a kicker is. Anchors like kickers too, because we like to feel like we're leaving on a positive note. But
And I love you guys, but we got to pick up the pace on this if we're going to finish this one on. If we're not to be the resident producer in the room, but if we don't pick up the pace on these slides, we're not going to finish them in our allotted time.
I will pick it up. Message heard. Okay. Review your rundown. So now we're getting closer to the newscast, right? You need to go through your rundown to make sure it looks the way you want it to look. What do you still need? Do you still have places or stories that you need to write or time that you need to fill? If you have too much content, what can you drop? What happens when that reporter does come to you and says, gosh, I need another 45 seconds. Do you have content that you have already kind of in your mindset? I could lose that if I have something better or takes precedent.
That's the kicker.
Yes.
That could be the kicker. Are there any updates? Remember, we marked stories that needed updates. Are there any updates to that news, to that local news that we need to make sure we get out there? And then once you have your blocks set, write your teases and write your headlines. And please do not make these, afterthoughts. Make some of your writing in your headlines, which traditionally are the most difficult and least favorite for producers to write. I personally love writing them because it's a way to kind of promote the content that's coming up next. And I get really excited about it. Have some fun with it. Again, this is one of those things that takes a little bit of practice, but don't forget to write your teases in your headlines. Okay, so this is what a screenshot of what ENPS looks like. This is the software that most of our stations use to put together a newscast. This is the nucleus to every newscast that hits the air. A lot of different people are going to have their hands on this throughout the day. As a producer, you're probably going to have more control of this than most. But just to kind of go through it a little bit, you've got your page numbers and your story slugs. It's all organized there for you. You've got what type of story it is, who's reading that story, is that anchor read column, who wrote the story. Then there's that nice little writing checkbox line. So if you still have something you need to write, you can have a little, lack of a check mark to remind you, I need to go back and write that. And then you have a lot of timing functions, which we won't go over at this time, but it just tells you how long each piece is. So that way you can figure out the timing of your newscast. And then, back in the day, we had tapes that we had to have each piece of video on. And then you had a tape operator who would put them in the deck and hit play and take them out. And it was somebody's sole job to organize all of these tapes. Well, now most of us, all of us should be on tapeless, and it's a seamless digital system.
I'd be more surprised if anybody used a tape.
Right? Although I know that some stations in a crisis moment have had to go back to it. So it's a good skill to kind of keep in your back pocket should you ever need to go back to tapes. But let's just, that never happens. So, your Moss column there is just going to tell you whether that video's in. So as a producer, you kind of watch that like a hawk as you get closer to your newscast to make sure your video's in. And then we have some of those columns that we talked about a little bit earlier that, mean different things depending on who's in there, your show director, your audio, all the people that are involved in the booth in the newscast have different needs for the ENPS rundown. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about what that looks like. Okay, so throughout your shift, these are things that we should be doing as we keep going throughout our day. Communicate. We've said that word so many times in this presentation, but you cannot communicate enough with everybody involved in your newscast. Continually check the wires and affiliates for must-have content. Being part of a company like Gray, you're going to have access to video and news stories from all of our stations across the country. So if something were to happen, it's going to be really easy to drag and drop that video and that information into your newscast. Just, stay on top of it and be aware of it. And your desk will help you with that as well. Ask for help if you need it. As a reporter anchor, I didn't mind at all if a producer asked me to jump in and help write something. The worst thing you can do is let yourself drown and don't ask anybody to throw you a life ring. So ask for help if you need it. and keep your eye on the clock. You're going to have a love-hate relationship with the clock. As a producer, as really anyone in a newsroom, but just try to stay on top of your time and make sure you are where you need to be at certain parts of the day. Okay, it's showtime. It's arrived. So get into the booth 10 minutes before your newscast and start going through your little mental check sheet of things you need to do before you hit air. Call up your live shots. This will look different depending on, again, the time of day and the day of the week that you're producing. If you're doing a 6 p.m. newscast, for example, you may have 4 or 5 live shots packed into that newscast. You need to make sure all of your live reporters are ready to go. They sound great. They look great. Communicate any changes that you've made last minute to not only the people in the booth, but also the anchors if they need to know, reporters if they need to know. It's kind of a preference on whether or not, you tell everyone everything, but just make sure if that person needs to know something changed, tell them and give them advance notice to adjust to that if they need to. Timing a show takes practice. ENPS has a timing function on the bottom of it. I learned how to back time on a clock, so I can't find myself using the timing bar on the bottom, but that's just something that once you get into the training process that a hiring manager and executive producer can help you run through and figure out your timing for your newscast. And as we talked about before, breaking news will happen. Take a breath, stay calm, trust your people. They're hired professionals for a reason. Work together as a team and just try to be the calm in the chaos. And after the newscast, if you need to have a quick debrief, feel free to do so. Stations are kind of different on how they handle this. If it's between like a 5 and 6 o'clock newscast, a lot of times there isn't a lot of time to have a quick debrief. But if something went catastrophically wrong, probably need to figure out what happened to make sure that that doesn't happen again. If you got any other responsibilities, whether it's posting to the web, archiving video, you might need to do that after a newscast. And then you get to prepare to do the whole thing over again tomorrow. We do have a quick video because I know that this is all very overwhelming, or it sounds overwhelming, but producing is such a fun and rewarding job. And we have a quick video from a producer from KCRG in Cedar Rapids, Ellen, to tell us why she loves producing.
I love that I get to be creative. I get to be the team leader.
Stand by.
I get to also write a variety of different things, including serious news, breaking news situations, and also just those stories that kind of restore your faith in humanity. I love writing, so I love being able to use that in my day-to-day and then create different ways of presenting the news. I like knowing a lot about everything. And yeah, that's just why I love news.
The stories that restore faith in humanity might be the kicker. So if you have time to include a kicker, you can certainly do that.
Well, kickers, they're not evil. It's just a situation where you got to think about what's important to people. I mean, everybody does need that dessert at the end of the meal. The only problem is what happens if you eat too much dessert. It's unhealthy, right? A newscast is the same way. You need to have a good mix of everything that you need to know and that makes you feel good. All of those things make for a healthy, balanced newscast.
I love it. Jennifer with the metaphors once again.
I think there's 3 at least so far in this so far.
I want to talk about growth opportunities for producers, and Ellen's a great example of that because she started with us as an intern. She came back, as a producer for midday and then weekends, and then she was in the 10 p.m., came to the 4 p.m. And so she's moved all around to what's worked with her personal schedule, and she's been able to do that because upward mobility is so very feasible as a producer. And I think we've got the next slide here to kind of talk more about, kind of that upward trajectory for a news producer. Really has a good track to management. Jennifer started out as a news producer and moved up to executive producer and then news director?
Generally a producer, the next step after, when you're a news producer, you're responsible for one newscast. When you're an executive producer, you're in charge usually of a series of newscasts of making sure they're executed correctly. The news director is an assistant news director is a natural progression. Then you're kind of in charge of all of them. Then you become a news director and you're in charge of all the newscasts, all the digital offerings, everything that the news department produces. And then beyond that, producers have such good organizational skills generally and good leadership skills, it's a direct track to management.
And these jobs are always going to be in demand with so many opportunities to grow within not only the station, but also the company as well. And Stephen, what would you say the demand is for news producers right now?
It's up there. It's way up there. And we need a lot of executive producers right now at several medium and large market stations in our company. And they're going to be looking for really good producers at some of our small and medium stations to fill those needs.
And if you're good at it, I mean, you can start out at a higher level than probably just about any other position in the newsroom. Or I'm sorry, in the and not in the newsroom, like in the nation, because they're just hard to find. And if you're such an in-demand skill, and I think there's a couple of reasons there's such demand. Is one, again, we talked about the path to management. If you're good at it, you get promoted. And I think the other reason is that, we as the way people watch news changes, they're looking more for news on their time, on demand. We live in a world where we don't really want to wait. So, I answer to that. And news needs to be live, because if it's not, like, what are the first three letters of news? It's new, right? If it's recorded, it's probably not new. So, I mean, so we find ourselves doing more newscast in order to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information, which requires more producers. So just think about, like, all of the different things that go into why there are so many. Personally, I don't understand why everyone doesn't want to be a producer. I loved it so much. And I used the skills I learned as a 22-year-old producer straight out of college every day now. Even though my job I'm not putting a newscast on air every day anymore.
I want to talk about the Gray Talent Pool as well. It's a great resource for us at Gray. This is a place where you can create a profile. Kind of think of it as like an internal LinkedIn for our company of 9,300 people. We've got more than 450 hiring managers who are using this site. So you go on there, you create a profile. You can put your resume on there, your reel, if you've got places in the country that you prefer to work, jobs that you prefer to do. News producer will be a very lucrative choice for you. Go ahead and put all that information in, and then our hiring managers can find you. It's a great way to be seen amongst some of the best in our business.
We hire at least one person a day from the Gray Talent Pool. So if you're interested in, you can put in, like, if you're not quite sure if you want to work in, let's say I live in Charleston, Savannah, or Myrtle Beach, you put all three in and say that you want to be a producer. And that is instantly pushed out to all of those hiring managers. Because also, if, let's say, you don't graduate until May, but it's in February, you're like, is there going to be an opening for me? Well, you can go ahead and fill out a Gray talent profile and list when your graduation date is, or if you're an experienced producer, when your contract date finished. And that way they'll know ahead of time of when you're available, and you can go ahead and start building that relationship.
Well, thank you guys for joining me today to talk about the life of a news producer. We think it's a super exciting job. It's one that, as we mentioned, is very much in demand. If you have any questions, recruiting@gray.tv is the email address to reach the recruiting team. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.